Who starts? Who
It's a mystery.
Oh, all right. Come on in.
Come on in.
Triptide.
Triptide.
Hello, and welcome back to Triptide. So, I guess I'll explain. Today's a very special episode. It'll just be me hosting. My co-host Sean is working on a very special government project, and it requires the use of his computer, which we normally record on. And I'm going to be using my computer, but the problem is one of my USB ports is broken, so we can only hook up one microphone. So we decided he's just going to work on his project for the government, and I am going to do a solo episode for this week, which is something that I've never done before. I've never done something like this per se. And I think when I originally thought up the podcast, and I've been thinking about it for a long time, I did think it would be either me and a bunch of friends or just me interviewing separate people. But I do find myself to be a very social person, and I think Sean has been a close friend of mine for a long time, so when I was making this, I was like, if I'm going to pick a co-host, he lives close by, so that's why I picked you, Sean. No, but we're really close, and we've always wanted to make something together, so it was cool to have somebody else in on this project with me. And, of course, once we hired Steven, we had a three-man trio to work on this, even though he's just behind the scenes. But, yeah, this will be the first time I've ever really spoken alone and recorded it. And I think I've recorded my thoughts a lot, but I've never put them out to the public for consumption. The good thing is the public consists of about 10 of my friends, and to be fair, Sean's friends as well. So I don't know what our viewer base is right now, but it's not like I'm going live on Oprah or something. This is a very relaxed stream we're going to be doing. I guess it's more of a podcast than a stream, but you know what I'm talking about. So I did want to talk some about my ADHD, and if you couldn't tell by my intro segment, I have ADHD. I think the reason I have felt largely a little off-kilter compared to other people in my life is probably because I have ADHD, if to jump straight into the topic, but it definitely feels as though my brain works in a manner that other people at least don't express. And I think when I was younger, it confused me some because I wasn't sure if people just didn't talk about the way their brain worked because it's such a niche, obscure concept, or if my brain simply worked differently. And I've been more drawn towards the second one just because I was diagnosed with ADHD. And the first thing I want to say is I don't think it is, at least for me, ADHD could be very serious, I'm sure, but at least for me, I don't think it's this life-altering disability or anything. And what I've always found funny about it is I got prescribed Focalin, and I chose not to take it when I was younger. I didn't like the way it manipulated my mind. I think it probably would have made me a better student, but my inherent creativity seemed to be dulled. Like I was focusing and enjoying myself, but the sporadic activity I was used to wasn't there, and I preferred that. And I think while it definitely, a lack of attention and hyperactive thought surely does impair my ability to learn in some degree, I've always thought it was funny, especially going to college, how widely abused study drugs are, like Adderall and even Focalin, I'm sure, and just anything people can get their hands on. A final's coming up and people will be like, oh, I got to find me some Adderall, but it's highly illegal to use study drugs if you're not prescribed them. And just the idea that, at one point I did go back to my doctor and I got Focalin to use just for my exams because I was like, if I'm behind in studying and this will help me study, I'll take some. And I thought about, I feel surely my brain does have some sort of chemical difference, but I don't feel entitled to these drugs I get prescribed, knowing other people are like dying for them. Not dying, I mean, that was an exaggeration, of course, but they're dying to get their hands on them. And they're willing to pay people they don't know serious upcharges, I'd assume, just to get these drugs that they're not allowed. And it was an interesting realization that people whose brains work normally probably feel similar to as I would on this drug, but society was like, nope, you can't take it because that's not allowed. And maybe I'm wrong. I don't know what a quote normal brain would feel like on Focalin, but just the idea that I feel entirely capable of doing well in my classes without a study drug means it's odd that I'm allowed a study drug anyway, whereas a kid who doesn't have ADHD and just struggles to focus, they're not. That is, you can't get prescribed Adderall because that would be wrong, which is a weird moral concept, and I'm no expert on this. Having ADHD doesn't mean I know anything about it. I mean, I know about living with it, but I do wonder if I am just wrong and living without ADHD is this vastly different experience. But I imagine it's very similar as, two brains are without it or with ADHD, because, it's very possible that two people's brains just work entirely differently, and we don't know because it's so internal. But I do, and I don't advise any of you out there to abuse study drugs, because I think you can do it without them. But I just think it's interesting to me that you're told you can't and it's illegal, and using study drugs is immoral and you can go to jail. I guess it's more of distributing probably that people get arrested for, but I feel entirely capable of doing my classes if I just worked harder, but they're just kind of encouraging me to take drugs to better aid my schoolwork. So it's an interesting perspective of somebody who is, quotes, disabled again, because it is a disability, but I've never felt disabled, and I don't park in handicapped spots or anything, which, to be fair, is the difference between a physical and a mental disability. But I've always, I thought life was a little different. I remember when I was younger, I think when I realized, I remember it was around the time I got diagnosed, at least. I was in a math class in middle school, and I was looking at the board, and it was a practice quiz. So it wasn't graded, but you still had to pay attention, and the teacher would be looking at how you did. So there I was on like question 6, and I remember just staring at the board, and I can't imagine how long it was, but I was in an entirely different world. I mean, I was gone. I was just thinking to myself, and I create these stories a lot, so it could have been anything. I have no idea where I went, but within my own mind, I was just off in La La Land, or whatever you like to call it, formulating all these ideas and these stories and keeping myself entertained because I was just not having this practice quiz. But the part that fascinated me is looking at the board, unaware of what happened, because obviously I knew I didn't even doze off because I wasn't asleep. I went into my own head and just entertained myself, I think, out of boredom. But I hadn't realized when I had looked back at the board, we were on question like 46. And I was like, oh no, I have been out for a while just staring at this board. And I was supposed to be writing a multiple choice answer for all of them. And I'm going to be honest with you, I cheated. It was a pretest, who cares? I just looked at the kid next to me and scribbled down a bunch of the same answers because I was like, it's not graded. I just have to pretend I was present for this class, because mentally I had zoned so far out. I didn't even realize I'd missed like 30 some questions. And that's when I sort of realized it could be problematic to have such an active imagination, as people called it. Because when you're a kid, everyone tells you you're energetic and you have an active imagination. And then eventually that turned into he has ADHD. And I think every kid is, well, not every kid, but most kids are active and have active imaginations. But it did feel like I was being pronounced slightly different when I was diagnosed with something, especially because I had a special doctor, and I guess he'd be a neurologist. I could be wrong, but I remember they put what I think was one of those nets that doesn't. Oh, I'm going to mispronounce this word, like an all right, let me look this up real quick. So, electroencephalograph brain scan. I think it was that. I could be entirely wrong, but they just put things on my head, basically. And I did basically a normal doctor's checkup, except it was with several mental tasks, I think, instead of like bonking on my knee and making sure it kicks up. And I absolutely loved it there. The person I worked with was amazing, and they put me on Focalin for a while, and I didn't have bad effects, which was good because a lot of the times they have to cycle through multiple drugs to find what works for somebody. And I think it did upset my stomach some, but ultimately it just made me a better student. But I realized over time that taking this Focalin wasn't spastic enough, if that makes any sense to people out there. I've been so used to living with this rampant brain where I felt I could generate stories within my own mind and I could multitask. Even if I was doing it poorly, it was satisfying in the sense, I guess I'd explain, I like to listen to music a lot while I read, which I don't do now, but I remember it very fondly, and I think at times I'll have something on in the background, whether it's music or a show, but I don't put on headphones like I used to. And I remember I used to watch this show, Saved by the Bell, which is about a bunch of high school kids, if I remember right. And Zach and Slater are these two studs who are trying to get with Kelly Kapowski. That's really the only plot. Everything else was just Zach's in trouble and how to get him out of trouble. And it was a good show, but I remember when I went to bed, my dreaming process would begin with me dreaming about being a part of Saved by the Bell and pretty much formulating my own dream and scripting it out. And I wouldn't, have lines or anything, but I would sort of have a scenario that I was going through as a member of the Saved by the Bell cast, but within the show. And eventually I'd fall asleep and I'd have normal dreams. But I remember that process of creating a first dream to follow and just tell myself a story until my brain put itself to sleep was incredibly interesting. And I still do similar things at times, but I'd say it's been a while since I've put myself directly into a show. Whereas now I think it's more of your normal pre-bed process. You kind of think about your day and the past and the future and just random aspects of your life, and you reflect a lot, which I think does prevent me from getting sleep sometimes because my brain gets too active. I'm going to take a sip of water real quick. But I find the general activity through most of my life to be very enticing. And to describe it, it is almost like there is an unseen world that people don't acknowledge. And maybe it's because I'm just telling myself a story in class because I'm bored. And it literally is me picturing things that aren't physically there. But on a more social level, it's the idea that it didn't seem like other people spent as much time in their own heads. or their much time, as much time conflicting with their own mind. And the process of feeling something and changing my mind later was very simple because I felt as though I had very many viewpoints. And when I was younger, I was definitely more arrogant. I tell myself everybody was, but I think particularly I had an extra air of arrogance to me because as a young kid, I think I was just too hyper to settle and think. But more recently, I would describe it as in my life, probably especially going to college, I think, provided me a lot of the tranquility I've needed. But I find myself, as I said, thinking about things in multiple viewpoints often. It's almost like I play devil's advocate with myself. And I also daydream a lot and dream a lot, and I think I prepare for a lot of situations subconsciously. And maybe it's not subconsciously because I am thinking about it, but I'll kind of get into arguments, or I'll think about what happened if I was in this situation, and I'll just play it out in my head for a while. And I think it did prepare me to think on my feet better, and just to be able to interact with the world around me at a quicker pace. And especially the idea of playing devil's advocate with myself, I feel made me more curious and hopefully creative. But things like growing up in a Roman Catholic school, I think that provided me with a lot of the curiosity I have in my life today. And we haven't talked much about religion on the cast, and I doubt we'll get too deep into it ever just because so many people have views that they hold tight and precious. And I wouldn't want to offend somebody's views for the sake of, I think most people do get some solace in them. But what I will say is I think everyone should have an understanding of what they believe, especially on a spiritual scale. I know religious is more confined to organizations, but people who believe in things such as philosophies or, even atheists wouldn't confine themselves to a religion. They would, I don't know, they might say spirituality, whatever they define this aspect of their life as, consisting to why we're here, if there's a sentience in the universe, and the creation of everything. And I think going to a Roman Catholic school helped me formulate my ideas better. I am agnostic, to be upfront, which basically means I believe there is a plausibility of a God, but also a plausibility there's not a God. And I understand talking about, understanding your beliefs and following up with the idea that my beliefs are basically anything is possible is a bit of a weak argument, but the idea I'm trying to get at is I found often in my surroundings the enforcement of faith rather than the nourishment of belief when I was younger. And I think it's because people simply didn't want to think about their religion. They just wanted to have faith in it. So regardless of what your spiritual beliefs are, all I'm asking is this podcast I consider to be a place for thinkers. You think about your religion. Because if somebody provides you with something that they feel is inaccurate about or incorrect with your religion, if your response is, now maybe obviously if it's a stranger you could just be like, bug off, but if you're unable to have a conversation about the things that threaten your religion, you don't believe in it. You're hiding behind it as a veil to protect your view of the world. Maybe that is, when I die, I have somewhere I get to go. Or maybe that is, there is a God watching over me, protecting me. But those views are only beliefs if you're willing to discuss the things that threaten them, and you're willing to defend it in light of them. And the thing I'd like to point out is, this is obviously most prominent with people who are religious, and the religion I most clear with is Roman Catholicism, because I was a part of it, and Christianity in general. But I bet I could have an amazing conversation with the Pope. And if I were to provide him with things that seem to challenge their religion, he would have great answers, because this is pretty much the epitome of the religion. And I think it's Catholicism, technically, not Christianity. But the idea is that you should be able to consider your religion rather than just believe in it. Because I think a lot of people are raised into religions, and the only issue is if you don't think about what it means and you just have this thin belief in it where you refuse to question it. For example, I think if you don't question something scientific and you don't throw threats at it, you risk the chance of ending up with a false scientific property, such as people who are like, well, gravity, I can't remember exactly what they did believe, but they were like, this rock is big and it's heavy, therefore this rock that is light, it falls at a different rate. Whereas the only difference, obviously, is wind resistance. And the same reason that a feather only falls slower than a rock, because wind resistance. And, you take them both up to the top of the building, you drop a bowling ball and a golf ball, and they hit roughly the same time. Obviously, there's wind resistance, but you prove maybe it isn't just bigger, heavier, falls faster. They took this scientific principle and they challenged it and they revised it and they improved it to make it accurate. Now, religion isn't straightforward, because there's never going to be a place where you can look at your religion and say it is concretely true, because that's the nature of it. Science and religion both lack the answer to what created us. The Big Bang, as we discussed, is essentially magic. And the question is, well, what created that magic? So neither side's going to have an answer, but I think philosophically it is relevant to question your beliefs and say, okay, here's something I'm uncertain about. Let me dig into this and what I feel. Because I don't think anyone should be confined to their parents' views or their organization's views. And I think we're at a time in history where more and more people are breaking away from religious conformity to a more enlightened spirituality. And again, that can be within any religion you're a part of. It just depends how you look at it. I'm not going to go too much deeper on religion right now, just because maybe I'll save that till Sean's here. I know when you bounce ideas back and forth, there's more room to get your message across accurately. I think I definitely do run the risk of saying something stupid just in general when I'm talking alone. So I hope that I don't end up exposing myself as, probably the worst thing I'm worried about is just exposing myself as stupid. Somebody's going to hear something I say and no one will be around to correct it, and it's just going to be factually inaccurate, which I do think happens a lot. I think my mind makes assumptions with words that are incorrect a lot, which is why it helps to have somebody else on to, bounce back these ideas and even just say, well, that's not what you meant to say. But I wanted to move on to this topic of first off, I want to address my vocal fillers. I think I say like a lot and probably do ums and produce unintelligent speech often. So if you notice that, feel free to call me out if you know who I am, because I am trying to improve on that, especially doing something like a podcast, because I want it to be as pleasing to listen to as possible. And I think there are several ways to go about that. But the first one is probably to eliminate the likes and the ums and the I feel like and all the other tropes that I end up saying. But I wanted to address this idea of certain sayings and how I don't think they make a lot of sense. One being, if everyone else jumped off a bridge, would you? I've thought about this a lot. My parents said this. I know a lot of your parents said this to you when you were younger. Does it make any sense? I mean, think about it. I probably would. Because if everyone else is jumping off this bridge, most likely there's a problem with the bridge, you know? Most likely it's safer to jump than to stay on the bridge. I can't imagine that I would doubt every single person jumping off this bridge at once. Maybe I'd look first and I'd see why. Obviously, I'd try to get a reasoning. But I do think it's unlikely in real life everyone would jump off the bridge without a reason. And even if they were like, well, you know, if your best friend jumped off a bridge, would you? Again, I think the problem with this question is it lacks the understanding that there is very probably a reason your friend is jumping off this bridge. And if they're just depressed, well, that's a very sad topic to be addressing in such a nonchalant manner. So I don't like the phrase, if everyone else jumped off a bridge, would you? I think it's just a lazy parenting phrase, which there are plenty of, such as, because I love you, which, seems like an attempt to negate a conversation with the fact that I love you, so you should just make me happy by ignoring your thoughts. Another one I've been thinking about is, I think I've brought this up before, but the idea that matter can neither be created nor destroyed. Now, I think Sean may have disagreed with me on this initially, but I find it odd that we accept that as a simple law of nature. Newton's whichever law, third or first, I want to say. But the problem I have with it is that we clearly know matter at some point was created, and it seems implied that if it was created, it can be created. And maybe humanly we're thinking, well, we know that there is a balance of energy and a conservation of matter. But again, it seems like we were taught there's 3 forms of matter by the society. The Pluto police are pushing on us that there is solid, liquid, and gaseous, and they're ignoring the clear presence of plasma. I think it's weird that we teach such a philosophical debate in such simple terms, because I think, what if at some point humans evolve to the point where we're capable of making matter? It'll have broken a law of physics. And maybe it's just because it is convenient to understand the conservation of energy and conservation of matter, and that essentially, practically, matter can't be created or destroyed. But just the concept that if the universe exists, why can't other things just pop into existence? And we're just not aware of them yet. So I do think about that a lot, because just the wide scale it's being taught at, and it has a very practical application, but I just think, if you know anything about conventional current, I think you should see the point I'm trying to get at here. We teach conventional current all across, I would assume the majority of physics rooms, because it exists for some purpose. So current flow is the opposite of conventional current flow, basically. And current flows from negative to positive. But conventional current flow, which is just this idea of what we're teaching in physics rooms, is positive to negative. And that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, maybe it's because I don't understand enough about physics, but being in electronics in high school and learning negative to positive, going to a physics room and being expected to do the same math, but with current flowing backwards, it just seems like it's one of those arbitrary existences of Why don't we just teach normal current? Why do we have this need for conventional current flow? So if anybody knows if there's a good reason to keep conventional current flow, please leave that down in the comments below. I would love your take on it. Something I have been thinking about recently, just to dive into another topic without any transition, is the idea of being a little insane. I think if you never feel insane, you might not truly understand sanity. And I think at times in my life I have felt a little like absolutely nuts. And maybe that's my ADHD talking. And I think I've always had an understanding of who I am. I wouldn't say I've ever been depressed in the sense that it is often used. I think I've been very sad for several days, and I think I've felt depressed, but I've never been depressed, and I've never seriously considered self-harm or anything of that nature, which I consider to be a latent optimism I possess, and I'm very grateful for. I believe that social interaction is my fuel. It has always made me feel good. Quarantine has been no fun, but I've still had interaction with people on Discord, and I've had people over and gone places, of course, and I interact with my parents, especially now that I'm 21. I can share a few drinks with them, which is nice, but social interaction is the thing that I think has kept me very positive. And I expressed this idea of feeling a little off kilter before because I have ADHD. And there are friends of mine. There's a friend of mine in particular who I won't name because I haven't talked to him about this and putting it on air, but we've discussed, he has ADHD as well. We've discussed being in our basements alone and just the nonsensical things that we do and just screeching or yelling or just feeling these urges to make some abstract noise. And obviously, I'm not going to say that makes me crazy. That's just, a preface to where we're going. I think that is something that I've always considered very amusing is all, and I wanted to share. And just when no one's around, the places my brain goes sometimes makes me feel like I must be a little special in the head because sometimes I feel the urge to talk to myself. And it's not like I'm just sitting there having a full-blown conversation, but it's just kind of natural, like, oh, well, did you look at that? This is some good chicken. Yes, it is indeed some good chicken. No one's around. I realize no one's around. I'm curious as to why I'm discussing this chicken with myself, but I'm just going to keep doing it. I mean, it is a fun time. I'm providing myself stimulus. And other things include having... I don't want to refer to it as OCD because I understand it's a very different condition. But symptoms that seem similar in the most minute aspect of OCD, if anything. But it would just be like, I have these tasks to do, so I want to do them in this order. And it would just be a random order that I would pick, and I would have to finish one and cross it off. But then I'd go to the next one, and I'd do about 20%, and then I'd jump somewhere else. And I guess it's hard to explain this way, but like specifically on test, if I get stuck on number 5, and I've reformed this habit a little bit, when I was younger specifically, say I got stuck on number 5, instead of going to number 6, I would jump to page 3, and I would start working from there. And then I would do like 10 maybe, and then jump to the middle of page 2. And it was more satisfying doing the test all over than just doing it straight through. It felt like I was drawn to this behavior, which is the only reason I refer it to OCD in some sense, in that I was inherently preferring to do things this way. Now, the main difference, I would say, is I had entire control not to. I could always tell myself, well, I need to do this quiz from start to finish, and I would. I just didn't have reason to. In the same vein, I think sometimes I do forget, and I know a lot of people have this problem, but forgetting where you are, not where you are, I guess I should rephrase, forgetting why you came where you are. So I would go upstairs, per se, to get maybe my wallet, who knows. But once I got upstairs, I'd be standing there, absolutely clueless why I walked up there. And things like that happen a lot. I've had problems where my brain misfires, and I have put milk in the cabinet with the bowls, and I, put my bowl in the fridge or something like that. And it starts to build up all of these concepts of this is not how the human mind works. And ultimately, I think the thing that made me feel and makes me feel it's a philosophy, a little bit nuts, is how bland some people's lives are. And maybe that's rude of me, but to view someone as uninspired is painful to me. It is very disappointing. And I think it's very visible in someone's willingness to explore a concept. For example, I think it is absurd that we just are okay with the fact that cigarettes, they swapped it from buying them at 18 to now you can only buy them at 21. And they didn't grandfather people in. So we have some large group of people out there, and I do wonder, I feel like a lot of my generation must agree with me, but some large group of people who are genuinely thinking, if you're 19 or 20, and to preface this, I have never been, a cigarette smoker or a vapor. I am not, I just am not interested in the concept, and I don't want to get physically hooked. But there's this group of people who I strongly disagree with that were like, if you've been smoking cigarettes or vaping for 2 years now and you're 20, it is illegal to buy nicotine products. And I think it was nicotine. I could be wrong. It's something that is, in vapes and cigarettes. So they just said, what if we cut somebody off cold in the middle of their prime addiction and said, deal with it? And the other concept is, why on earth do you have to be 21 to be cognizant of this decision? Especially in the same vein as, why is the rest of the world able to drink before we are? And both of these things in comparison with our military program, where you can go out and you can go to a foreign country and kill somebody. And you can do that for 3 years. And then you're mature enough to drink or smoke, or to buy nicotine technically, because I think you can smoke, but it just seemed mind-boggling to me that there's people who are so uninspired as to think we have power because we're old. So let's refuse to give this power to younger people to feel, better about ourselves. I can't imagine the rest of the world gets along without 21 as the drinking age fine, so America's doing it to be safe when they're clearly okay with giving these people guns. And whatever your views on gun laws are, I think if you're old enough to have a gun and shoot people, you're probably old enough to drink, right? Maybe not at the same time, but it seems ludicrous to me that this exists. And furthermore, we're part of this system of ignorance, I think, where so many people fall victim to this concept of they're just not interested in caring. And I'm not saying I'm going to, protest these laws or anything, My problem there is with the people who make them. The people around me are the ones who I think make me feel a little crazy at times because their interest is solely financial. And I wouldn't say this of any of my friends, luckily, because I think I'm drawn to people I'm more similar to, as we all are. But I think most of you out there have met somebody before who is just so incredibly vapid and absent in the mind, where they're just out having fun and drinking and partying, and they have no personality. Or somebody who is so bland, where their only goal is to make money and work in business and for their career and is having absolutely no fun. And both of these people to me seem like such a psychotic approach to life. The idea that, one, you would postpone, enjoying yourself and trying new things and living and exploring the world. It's almost like they're not aware of death. Or I should say, they don't care. They're just hoping that their 40s, or maybe their late 20s even, start to become enjoyable. And their only focus is on work. Those people boggle me because they're missing life while it's happening. On the other end is the people who solely party but don't have a personality. Like, you can't have a deep conversation with because there's just nothing there. They've spent so little time thinking that they're simply a party and nothing more. I think those people are very aware of death, maybe, but they're lacking any desire to become intelligent. And that also boggles my mind. I would say that this isn't a majority of people or anything, because the people I associate with, I don't view this way. It's just that these people exist, which I think sort of separated me from a lot of people in terms of how I view the world versus a large majority of Americans. And I hope to inspire everyone listening to, A, think about life and, understand that you should have a personality. You shouldn't just be having fun. You should have some substance to your character. And maybe you have enough money that you don't have to worry about a job. You should still have to worry about if you're worth talking to. That's the minimum. And to those people out there I've met who seemed solely interested in, progressing work and succeeding, I get there is a lot more merit to that. But I would love to hear how they unwind. Because I'm talking specifically about people who seem like they're against other people having fun. And it's because they don't see themselves as able to do it, maybe. But the idea of other people going out and drinking, per se, at college, to them it's like, how could somebody do that? How could somebody entail that lifestyle? It's almost like they lack the understanding of these people are living their life in a way that satisfies them, so it doesn't have to satisfy you. So being aware of others and being aware of yourself are two very important topics that I'd like to get through on this episode. I guess I have failed to address what truly makes me feel crazy, and I think part of the problem is I talk in circles like this, and I have so many thoughts that I'm unable, I say unable or enable, and I'd never know which one's right. So let me know down in the comments below, because I'm not going to look it up. Unable or enable to get these thoughts out in a way that truly represents what I'm trying to say. I think I can produce words that generally have a meaning around where I want them to be. But to get something spot on, precise, and actually transfer my message to the receiver in a way that I know, based on how well I communicated, they're on the same page as me, that eludes me often. And I think that's probably what makes me feel crazy at times. This idea of there's so much in my head and I can only get it out in these small, slow fragments. And we don't have a productive form of communication. I think words lack so much of what I'm trying to convey. I want to convey the way I view something so somebody can really understand where I'm coming from. And if the only way I can do that is by talking, I'll get some of it across, but they're really just going to take those words and view it how they do. And it's almost as though I'm struggling to put you in my perspective, which is something that I want to get better at. And I do think communications classes have helped, because I've never considered myself a bad communicator, but I think I've always thought I could be so much better. I think this is one of the fields where there's so much room for constant improvement, because the ideal solution is I can speak for an hour like this, and all of the people who listen truly understand everything I'm saying, rather than it just being me rambling and people, sort of getting it, but not understanding why I've done it or why they're listening. I guess why you're listening evades both of us, because I know I like putting this out for the sake of emptying my thoughts to the world. If you like listening to them, that's why. If you're just doing it out of sympathy, well then, John, I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate your comments. I will see you again, hopefully soon. But the rest of you, I hope, and John too, I hope there is something to be gained from this, especially as this podcast grows. I have this idea that maybe everyone would like to have a podcast. And it doesn't apply to everybody, because some people are introverted, I suppose. But having your thoughts and being able to project them to other people is incredibly satisfying. It is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I didn't know how. And I finally just said, I'm putting a podcast together. And I got Sean to come in with me, so I knew it would happen. And I think you get a better understanding of your own thoughts the more you discuss them, which is why this episode might just sound like an hour of nonsensical rambling, and maybe it's painful to get through. But what I'm hoping is you hear somebody telling you what goes on in their mind, and it makes you think about your own minds, and it makes you think about how other people might perceive you, and it makes you aware that there is more to life than financial success, and there's also an importance to not just partying all the time if you don't have a legitimate personality behind you and you're not worth anything in a conversation and you have no pursuit of knowledge. I hope that these concepts resonate with people, because I have long thought about things to myself, which is, I think, part of ADHD, and just kind of pondered these ideas. And I'll bring them up to my friends, but it's quite impossible to bring up the entirety of the contents of my mind to my friends. Part of it is a lack of personal understanding of what I'm thinking, which may not make sense, but sometimes I feel as though I ponder on something for a week and then I finally understand what I've been thinking about. And there's no one around to share it with, and it fades. And it's still a part of my mentality, but it feels like I've yet to get it out and address it, so it's hard to apply to my life. And I am hoping, to have Sean back next week, but the concept of talking alone has really promoted my metacognition, I'd say. Metacognition, for all you out there, is the process of thinking about your thoughts, because there's so much going on just to talk, And people forget that. People forget how insane it is to produce a message. You have to think about what you're trying to say, code it in a manner that it's easy to decode, worry about how you're coming off and if people will think you sound arrogant or if people think you sound boring or think you sound dumb or all of these social cues. And as much as it's easy to say, well, I don't care about those things, on some, inherent level, you don't want to sound dumb or arrogant. You'd rather sound the opposite if you're making a good message. And then on top of that, I'm on the understanding that I'm talking to myself, which is something that is so rarely promoted. I think I usually would feel crazy if I just talked to myself for an hour. But now that I have some output, now that I know it's going somewhere, I feel as though it's not more validated per se, but it's more important. It's these ideas might actually reach somebody that I've been having. And even if I haven't finished constructing them, they'll be better put together each time. Each time I go into these recording sessions, I'll have a better understanding of what I'm doing and how to do it. And maybe you enjoy the idea of me jumping from topic to topic because I think that is how my brain works. I hope people get a kick out of it at least, because I really am mentally divided. So I'll think about a topic really in depth. I'll be fully committed to something. For example, I could be thinking about a roller coaster and how I'd build a roller coaster and how I would definitely want loop-de-loops because they're awesome. But if I think about how somebody's wallet might fall out on the loop-de-loop, well, then I might think about wallets and capitalism and the concepts of, is capitalism the best solution for American economics? And I think I try to be well informed on everything at least a little bit, but essentially a lot of my brain is just questioning things and working with what little information I have to formulate thoughts on everything at once. It's like I have multiple sections of my brain raising their hand, and I can pick on one and call on it, and then all of a sudden that's the forefront of my thought. I could go in so many different directions at once that I just have to silence everything and pick one and start talking. And I think that's something I struggled with when I was younger. I know I definitely had an issue where people would talk to me. I would hear what they're saying. Halfway through, I'd have what I want to say. I'd know my response to this. And I'd start to think about it and formulate it. And I would lose attention to what they were telling me because I had already decided on what I wanted to say. And I think a lot of people do that, but I particularly felt, not victim of it, but felt guilty of it, as though it was something that I needed to work on. And I hope that I've gotten better. I really understand a lot of these self-analyses are going to be framed in a manner that may not necessarily be true, because it's how I view myself rather than how others do. But I believe I've improved at that. So another concept to put out to all of you there is to really ponder on what somebody's telling you and take it in before formulating your response. Because nobody's going to mind if you stall when you respond, is what I've learned. If you really just hold yourself back and then you have to put together what they said, it might be a little awkward, but if they know they're going to have a good conversation with you because what they tell you will be heard, that person is going to value you a lot more than if they know that you're just there for, them to speak. For example, if you have a friend who just talks to you for the sake of they want to talk, you're not going to have a good time with that friend because you're not going to feel like your input gets to them. And I think oftentimes it can be hard to truly be considerate in conversation, because sometimes you really do just have things to say. And at least me, I have things to say, and I struggle with the idea that I don't want to lose them, as though it's suddenly important. This thought I created a few minutes ago is suddenly so relevant to me, I have to say it. I don't want to lose it. Whereas the reality of it, I think what's helped me a lot is understanding that if I think of something and I don't get a chance to say it before I forget, the odds are I'll be able to think of something else. You know, as long as you're able to recall something, and maybe it's because my ADHD that I feel it's super easy to bring something up to talk about. But once I have something to talk about, I can just run with it. And I can just go and do however long I need to talk to fill, you know, and I don't try to fill social gaps, but I understand that when somebody says something to me, it's my turn to respond. So I'd like to have something, relevant to say. And I think that's not too difficult, because if you created something a few seconds ago, sure, maybe it was a good thing to say, but you can just as easily take what they're saying and create something new as a response. So don't struggle to cling on to these thoughts you have. Maybe, try to hold them while they're talking so you have something ready to say because you just want to say them. But if you lose something, don't sweat it, I guess is what I'm saying. And maybe that concept doesn't make sense to a lot of you, but I lose ideas and mental concepts all the time. It is incredibly frustrating sometimes, because I'll be in bed at night trying to go to bed, and I'll think of something that I think is really profound. And it probably isn't. Most of the time it's not. But to me, it connects in my brain in such a way that helps me develop an idea I have. So I'm like, well, do I get out of bed and get on my phone and write it down? So now I've looked at a screen and I've been on my phone and I've been, jotting my thoughts down. And that's getting me out of bed. Or do I ignore it and try to go to bed, understanding that I'm forgetting something and losing an idea actively while trying to relax and go to bed? That is definitely a duality that I struggle with. Am I right, everybody? All you out there, I hope you know what I'm talking about. So we are getting towards the end. So just so I don't forget, I wanted to tell you something really important. I know we were talking about religion the other day, so I wanted to share this Bible verse that I was reading that I found amazing. It is Matthew 6:42, and it says, "Thou who invest through Robinhood gets a free stock for both you and me." And what he meant by that is, if you use my link in the description below and start investing on Robinhood, you and I will both get a free stock. And I hope that I even told this joke right, because I'm pretty sure I didn't. But I just made it up. So who cares? I also wanted to do something Sean likes, so we'll go to Sean for that. Awesome. So, before we close off, I did want to talk about my music, per se. That's a very loose term for all of you out there. I have an acoustic guitar. The strings on it are currently broke, and I have new ones I'm trying to restring, but I broke one of the ones I was restringing. It's a mess. I'm really trying to get it restrung soon so I can learn to play. I'm not going to pretend I play guitar. I would feel phony making that claim. But I want to address the fact that I do have a guitar and at times play it, because we don't have a song of the week this week, and I only use music that I know people are okay. I like using them as outros. I could just recommend a song, but I like having an outro, something to listen to after the episode. I've thought it's very satisfying, and we've had some incredible music in the past. Thank you to Devon Davis, DVN, DVS. Thank you to Couch. I was listening to Couch the other day, and once their playlist ended, or once the shuffle ended, the music that came on after them was good, just because music associated to them is such a vibe. You know, I really loved what Couch had for us. And of course, Jack Delamater. He is such a sweet guy and such a good musician. And he's quite funny, too. He's just such a good guy. So to put myself in there with all of these legends, I'm going to add in probably the worst music you have ever heard. But it's something I wrote and played on guitar. My main worry about adding in my own music is that I won't be able to set your expectations low enough. I really hope you go into this expecting to hear garbage. And you don't even have to listen. I will be very okay knowing that you skip this part. But it's a song I wrote called High. It is something that I actually did share with a girl, and I know before all of your questions come, she still talks to me. I know, crazy. It surprises me too. But I love playing music. I love singing music. I wish my voice sounded incredibly different, but I'll slap that in as the song of the week. And I guess for book of the week, which isn't a real thing, I do recommend Neil deGrasse Tyson's Letters from an Astrophysicist. It has been incredibly fun to read. I've been having a blast with it. I think it tackles a wide array of topics, which is perfect for someone like me. So look into that. I'll be reading Fahrenheit soon, so hopefully I'll be able to give you insight on that. But yeah, I hope you liked this solo episode. I hope it wasn't too sporadic. I know I've never done something like this, so hopefully at least it came out audibly pleasing, if nothing else. And I hope you guys all have wonderful holiday seasons. I know I am incredibly excited for the new year, as I know some of you out there are. So, let's jump into 2021 and have a happy Triptide misgiving. My name's Hendrick Knight, and this is my band.